Well, good morning, everyone. Can I welcome you to the second meeting in 2013 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Can I remind everybody to switch off all their mobile devices because they do affect the broadcasting system. We've got a very busy agenda today, so we'll get started by considering agenda item 1, business and private. Seek the agreement of the committee to take agendas items 5 and 6 in private to allow the committee to consider the evidence heard today from Sandra White on her proposed Members' Bill and for us to consider our approach to scrutinising the Government's climate change draft report on proposals and policies. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. We move to agenda item 2, which is Water Resources Bill Scotland. We now consider this at stage 2. We have a number of government and non-government amendments to consider today, and the intention is to complete stage 2 consideration at the meeting today. So I welcome Nicola Sturgeon, Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Investments and Cities, and her supporting officials, Christina Phillips, Bill Manager, Stephen Rees, Legal Directorate, and Alex Gordon, Office of the Scottish Parliamentary Council. I now move to the marshalled list of amendments. Just before I start, it might be helpful to point out a few things before we start in order to speed things along. If a member does not wish to move their amendment, they should simply say not moved. In that event, any other member can move the amendment at that point, but I will not specifically invite other members to do so, assuming no other members move the amendment. I will simply go to the next amendment on the marshalled list. And if anybody wants to withdraw an amendment, I'll put the question, does anyone object to Amendment X being withdrawn? If any member objects, I will immediately put the question on the amendment. Okay. So first of all, I call Amendment 53 in the name of Jim Eadie, grouped with Amendments 12, 1 and 57. Jim asked to move Amendment 53 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I move and speak to Amendments 53 and 57 in my name. These are probing amendments, the purpose of which is to explore ways in which the Water Resources Scotland Bill can be further strengthened in order to take on board the views of stakeholders expressed during stage 1 of the bill, to reflect the recommendations of the committee in its report at stage 1, and of course to build on what is already a worthwhile piece of legislation. I'm grateful to the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds Scotland for having engaged with me in discussions over the bill and for their help in taking forward the various amendments I have tabled. Members of the committee will have received a helpful briefing from RSPB Scotland, so I can come to the point. Amendment 53 addresses criticisms made by a range of witnesses at stage 1, including the UK Environmental Law Association, the IHP, HELP Centre for Water Law, Policy and Science and Scottish Environment Link, that the Sustainable Development Duty in Part 1 was not sufficiently robust. It is also consistent with the committee's own recommendation in its Stage 1 report that all 3 pillars of sustainability deserve the same emphasis. The amendment would provide a stronger duty and is drafted in a way which is consistent with the provisions of other Scottish legislation, such as the Marine Scotland Act 2010. Part 2, Section 3 of that Act requires Scottish ministers and public authorities to act in the way best calculated to further the achievement of sustainable development, including the protection and, where appropriate, enhancement of the health of that area, so far as is consistent with the proper exercise of that function. The amendment is also consistent with the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009, Part 4, Section 44, Clause 1. Similarly, Amendment 57 is designed to make clear on the face of the bill that development of our water resources must be carried out sustainably. As RSPB have pointed out, a similar amendment led to the word sustainable being included in the long title of the Flood Risk Management Act 2009. This amendment makes clear that the bill gives consideration to all 3 pillars of sustainability, that is, economic, social and environmental aspects. Therefore, this amendment is entirely consistent with the committee's recommendations at stage 1 and with the Cabinet Secretary's own evidence during stage 1 when she stated, "Our intention was never to drive economic benefit to the detriment of social or environmental factors, as these always need to be weighed up and balanced." Although of limited legal effect, the long title acts as a description of the purpose of the bill and should reflect our strong desire to ensure that development is sustainable.
Okay, Cabinet Secretary to speak to Amendment 12 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. I'll take each amendment in turn, and I should start by thanking Jim Eadie for lodging these amendments, because they give us the opportunity to discuss some of these issues in more detail. Amendment 53 seeks to alter the duty on ministers under Part 1 so that in taking the steps they consider appropriate for the purpose of ensuring the development of the value of our water resources, they will be required to do so in a way best calculated to further the achievement of sustainable development. That would expressly include the protection of and, where appropriate, recovery of water resources. I should say I have no difficulty with the first part of that revised formulation of the sustainability duty that is proposed by Jim Eadie. That is ways best calculated to further the achievement of sustainable development, rather than ways designed to contribute to the sustainable use of the resources, as is currently stated. I do, however, have more of a difficulty with the second part of the amendment, which provides that sustainable development includes the protection and, where appropriate, recovery of water. And the reason for that is that water resources are already protected under the Water Environment and Water Services Scotland Act 2003, and ministers and SEPA are already obliged, when exercising their functions under that Act and under any related legislation, to act in the way best calculated to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. Section 22 of the 2003 Act also includes provision for ministers by regulation to make provision for the remediation or restoration of the water environment. So I'm not clear what gap in the existing legislation the second part of this amendment would be intended to fill. I would therefore ask Jim Eadie to not press this amendment today. However, I would be happy to discuss with him an amendment for Stage 3 that covered the first part of that amendment, and if we could come to an agreement on that, I would be happy at Stage 3 to consider supporting that. If I can turn to Amendment 12, which is in my name, this amendment also relates to Part 1 of the bill, in which the duty placed on ministers is to take such steps as they consider appropriate for the purpose of ensuring the development of the value of Scotland's water resources. This amendment is intended to clarify that the concept of value of Scotland's water resources relates not just to the economic, but also to the social and environmental benefit. This informs what is to be regarded as the value of water resources, so as to avoid limiting this to their inherent value. As I indicated during the Stage 1 debate last month, I've listened carefully to the comments that have been made by a range of stakeholders on this point, and I'm pleased to bring forward an amendment that confirms ministers have to weigh up social and environmental benefits alongside economic benefit when they take steps to develop the value of Scotland's water resources. And I think this amendment goes some way to addressing the points that Jim Eadie made in moving his own amendments. Amendment 1, Convener, I don't support this amendment to include peatlands in the definition of water resources. Again, though I understand the reasons for it being brought forward, the addition of the word peatlands to the definition of water resources I don't think helps to support the purpose of this bill. Part 1 of the bill is about water resources in the conventional, commonly understood sense. It's not about bogs, fens or any other type of land. In my view, adding peatlands to Section 1 goes beyond the intended ambit of Part 1. It's seeking to protect peatlands by artificially stretching the definition of water resources in a way that I don't think is appropriate. That said, the Government is committed to supporting peatlands for the many multiple benefits that they provide: biodiversity and potential carbon sequestration, for example. The 2012 budget announced a further Government contribution to peatland restoration, and the Government and its agencies are working actively to support the protection and maintenance of these valuable lands. The Government is also committed to working with Scottish Natural Heritage and others to develop a peatland plan that recognises the valuable multiple benefits that they provide. Not only will that consider how we can restore damaged peatland, it will focus on how we can, and indeed how we are, protecting the good quality peatland that we have, and that will consider all peatland across Scotland. In short, the Government is taking action to protect and maintain peatlands, but I don't believe this amendment to this bill is the appropriate way of furthering that aim. And finally, Convener, Amendment 57 seeks to alter the long title of the bill to make reference to the sustainable development of Scotland's water resources. Amending the long title of the bill doesn't affect the content of the bill, and it wouldn't be of any practical effect. As I've just described, sustainability is adequately provided for in the bill. Development of any kind is covered by the long title as it stands, and the addition of this adjective is, I think, an embellishment that gives perhaps undue emphasis to one strand of development. What counts is the meaning and the effect of Part 1 itself taken over all. The long title is simply a formal element of the bill that offers an introduction to the main topics included in it. And as I've said in relation to the amendment in my name, the purpose of that amendment is to ensure that value is understood in its widest sense. So I would ask the member not to move Amendment 57.
Okay, thank you. Can I call Elaine Murray to speak to Amendment 1 and the other amendments in the group?
Thank you, Convener. First, in terms of the other amendments in the group, I'd like to indicate my support for all of those amendments. So I hear what the Cabinet Secretary has said about aspects of Amendment 53, but the policy intention of all the amendments I do strongly support. Peatlands, and in particular peat bogs, are important water resources, and the specific inclusion of peatlands in this amendment would ensure that peat bog management and restoration can be eschewed under the bill's main purpose. That's the point of the amendment, under the bill's main purpose of developing Scotland's water resource to deliver environmental and associated economic benefits to Scotland. Sustainable land management within drinking water catchments is one example of that. The IUCN UK Commission of Inquiry on Peatlands states that where drinking water supplies arise in peatland-dominated catchments, peatland restoration can improve raw water quality, thus reducing the cost of downstream water treatment. RSPB Scotland, who were instrumental in developing my amendments also, has expressed concern that using the 2003 Act definition of wetlands means that peatland habitats will not be considered to be water resources. However, there is no doubt that peatlands, including blanket bogs, raised bogs and fens, are wetlands, and they are considered as such in the SEPA's wetland typology for Scotland, and the Ramsar Convention wetlands of international importance includes peatlands within its definition of wetlands. Despite this, strict interpretation of 2003 Act definition has led to the most abundant peatlands or peat bogs being discounted as wetlands in Scotland for the implementation of that Act, which is one of the reasons for trying to ensure that it's okay in this Act. This was a consequence of the initial proposed definition of a wetland being considered too broad during the parliamentary process of the 2003 Act. The wetland definition was subsequently revised to make it narrower and more specific, but unfortunately this led to ambiguity about whether the definition covered all peatland types. The proposed amendment would not introduce any changes to the implementation of the 2003 Act, since that definition of wetland would remain unchanged. However, this amendment would ensure that sustainable management of Scotland's peatlands can be taken forward under this bill's purpose of developing Scotland's water resources. This would deliver great economic, environmental and social benefits for Scotland. In its Stage 1 report, the committee sought a response from the Scottish Government on whether peatland habitats are covered by the reference to water resources under the bill. That was recommendation 29. Amendment 1 would clarify that peatland habitats, including blanket and raised bogs, are considered water resources within the bill. Now, I hear what the Cabinet Secretary says in terms of the Government is taking forward peatland resources in Scotland anyway. However, there is still a long way to go in terms of restoring all Scotland's peatlands, and having a clear reference to peatlands in the definition of water resources will ensure that they cannot be discounted when developing the value of Scotland's water resource. Peatland restoration is valuable on many grounds: water quality, biodiversity, carbon storage and climate change adaptation. The IUCN UK Commission of Inquiry on Peatlands recognised that peatland restoration within catchments where drinking water supplies arise can improve raw water quality and reduce the costs of downstream water treatment.
Anyone else want to contribute? Okay, Jim, can I ask you to wind up and press or withdraw your amendment, please?
Thank you, Convener. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her explanation in relation to Amendment 53 tabled in my name. I acknowledge what the Cabinet Secretary has said, that no problems exist with Part 1 of the amendment, and welcome her offer to give further consideration with a view to bringing forward an amendment which could be lodged at Stage 3 of the bill. I'm therefore content not to press my amendment to the vote and look forward to those discussions which will take these matters forward. I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for her explanation in relation to Amendment 57. I will, along with other members of the committee, I'm sure, reflect on the points that she has made and will have further discussions with stakeholders on this issue. I'm therefore content not to press Amendment 57 to the vote.
Okay, Jim has indicated that he wishes to withdraw his amendment. Does anyone object to Amendment 53 being withdrawn? No. Okay, thanks. The call Amendment 12 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary already debated with Amendment 53. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yeah.
That is agreed. Call Amendment 1 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 53. Elaine, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
We're not agreed, so there will be a division. Can I ask all those members who support the amendment to vote now? 2. All those against the amendment? 5. The amendment is not agreed. So the question is that Section 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Section 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I now call Amendment 2 in the name of Elaine Murray, grouped with Amendments 54, 13 and 3. Elaine, can I ask you to move Amendment 2 and speak to the other amendments in the group?
I'll start by moving Amendment 2 in case I forget to do elsewhere, and I'll speak specifically on that one. Any duties or directions for Scottish Water should extend to all its subsidiaries, for example, Scottish Water Horizons or Business Stream. Section 25 of the Bill introduces provisions that will allow ministers to pay grants or lend directly to subsidiaries of Scottish Water. Therefore, it would be in keeping with this provision if ministers were able to give direction to Scottish Water subsidiaries for the purposes of taking forward the sustainable development of Scotland's water resource. Amendment 2 ensures that subsidiaries are included. Amendment 3 is consequential and provides a definition of subsidiary in terms of the Companies Act 2006.
Jim, can I ask you to speak to Amendment 54 and the other amendments in the group?
Thank you, Convener. I move and speak to Amendment 54 in my name. This could be a straightforward way to support the sustainable development of Scotland's water resources. It is consistent with Committee Recommendation 56, which suggested the inclusion of the Forestry Commission and that the Scottish Government should consider broadening the range of designated bodies. As members will appreciate, being listed as a designated body does not in itself have any ramifications until such time that ministers may choose to direct them under Section 2. Each of the 3 bodies listed in my amendment have important land management roles and can make a positive contribution to sustainable land management, in particular in drinking water catchments. Another argument in support of designating the Water Industry Commission for Scotland is that, as economic regulator of Scottish water, ministers should be able to seek advice from them on the economics or business impacts of any steps or measures that may be taken under Section 1.
Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to speak to Amendment 13 and the other amendments in the group?
I'll come to Amendment 13 shortly, Convener. I'll start with Amendments 2 and 3. I don't think it's appropriate for subsidiaries of Scottish Water to be included in the list of designated bodies as proposed by these amendments. Scottish Water has deliberately set up subsidiaries to undertake commercial projects that are separate from the core business of Scottish Water, and that ensures that there's a clear distinction drawn between the water and sewerage services that Scottish Water undertakes as a public utility and the commercial operations such as Scottish Water Horizons. Scottish Water carries the primary responsibility, though, for the exercise of the function concerned, and therefore I believe ministers should direct themselves to Scottish Water for the achievement of any outcome. It's for the management of Scottish Water to decide then if a subsidiary is the best place to secure the desired outcome, and ministers wish to give the board the freedom to do so and to manage their affairs. The ability to direct subsidiaries, I think, would constitute undue interference in the operation of the group, but perhaps more importantly, it would potentially be a recipe for confusion. I would therefore ask Elaine Murray to withdraw Amendment 2 and not to move Amendment 3. If I can turn now to Amendment 54 in Jim Eadie's name, and I do have a great deal of sympathy with the points Jim Eadie made in speaking to his amendment. The list of designated bodies in Section 3 of the Bill are those organisations that ministers feel have a key role in participating in the development of the value of our water resources and whom it might be appropriate for ministers to direct in this regard. The Forestry Commissioners and the National Park Authorities, although they may well have an important role to play, are not thought likely to require direction from ministers in that regard. My main comment, though, is in relation to the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. Ministers currently have no power to direct the Commission on matters of policy, and I believe it would be inconsistent with the objectives of legislation establishing the Commission as an independent economic regulator if ministers were to seek such powers of direction. The additional point I would make is that not being on the list of designated bodies is no barrier to participation in the broader hydronation programme. Partnership working is crucial to the success of much of this agenda, and many organisations are already participating from across different sectors. Given the universal nature of water, everyone has a role to play to some extent in contributing to the good stewardship of this resource. So for these reasons in particular, my point about the Water Industry Commission, I would ask Jim Eadie not to move Amendment 54. However, as I said at the outset, I do have sympathy with his general argument here. The fact that this is not a static situation, it is an evolving agenda, is the reason why it's important for ministers to have the ability to add or remove organisations from the list should it become apparent that it would be helpful to do so, and the bill provides that opportunity. Amendment 13 extends that opportunity to some extent by allowing ministers not just to add or remove a body, but to update the list if, for example, a body added to the list at a later date changed its name. So the provisions of the bill as it stands, with Amendment 13 added, does provide flexibility for organisations to be added in future should there be a feeling that that is appropriate or necessary.
Want to say anything? Okay, can I ask Elaine to wind up and press or withdraw your amendment, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'm actually slightly puzzled by the Cabinet Secretary's explanation on my amendment. I actually thought it would be helpful to explicitly state that subsidiaries were covered by Section 1. In terms of the purpose of the bill, some of the Scottish Water subsidiaries will be instrumental in taking forward the development of Scotland's water resource. I give the example of Scottish Water Horizons, who describe themselves as using innovative ideas, knowledge and assets to encourage growth and renewable technologies. And that, to me, very much fits in with the aspirations of the bill and of the hydronation agenda to project Scotland as a global leader in water resources, management and expertise. So I'm slightly confused as to why the Cabinet Secretary does not seem to want subsidiaries of Scottish Water to be covered by Section 1. I'm confused by that. It may be, I think I will not move this because I want to look into this in a bit greater detail, I have to say. Can Cabinet Secretary come? Yes, Cabinet Secretary.
To be helpful, I would be happy to discuss the matter further with Elaine Murray. The subsidiaries of Scottish Water are covered by Part 1 as part of Scottish Water. The point is the ministerial direction goes to Scottish Water, and then it would be for Scottish Water to determine whether it, in its core function or through one of its subsidiaries, was the best way to fulfil the content of the ministerial direction. So it's not that they're not covered, it's simply that we see the route from ministers by direction to the subsidiaries being through Scottish Water as the overall body. But I'd be happy to discuss the matter further.
And we can think about it.
The member wishes to withdraw the amendment. Does anyone object to Amendment 2 being withdrawn? No. So Amendment 2 is withdrawn. The question is that I call Amendment 54 in the name of Jim Eadie, already debated with Amendment 2. Jim, to move or not move?
Not move.
Okay, the member wishes to... Oh, right, that's not moved. The question is that I call Amendment 13 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 2. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. I call Amendment 3 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 2.
Consequential on 2, so it's not moved.
Not moved. The question is then that Section 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yeah. I now call Amendment 14 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 14A, B, C, D, E and Amendment 74. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 14 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
Convener, Amendment 14 relates to the requirement for ministers to report to Parliament on how they fulfil their duty under Section 1 to ensure the development for the value of Scotland's water resources. I've listened to the comments that have been made about the reporting period, and while I agree that there should be a requirement for ministers to report on progress, I'm not sure that producing a formal annual report is appropriate or proportionate. I'm therefore proposing an amendment that commits to producing one report within 3 years and then having ministers to determine the reporting periods after that. This will give us flexibility to consider whether there are efficiencies to be made in joining up reporting, for example, around flood risk and river basin management planning. I also certainly welcome the committee's intention to undertake annual scrutiny of progress following commencement. In relation to amendments 14A to 14E put forward by Jim Eadie, I welcome these amendments because I do think they give us an opportunity before we get to the final stage of this bill to discuss whether we've got the balance of reporting right. As I said, well, firstly, I do agree that a long-term agenda needs a long-term framework, and that must include reporting on progress made. However, I've already said that I'm not yet convinced that that's always best achieved through the laying of an annual report or having a duty that exists in perpetuity. But equally, I do think there is a discussion to be had to see whether we've got that balance right. And therefore, if Jim Eadie wasn't to press these amendments today, I'd be very happy for my officials to discuss with him further amendments that he or the government could bring forward at stage 3 to further shift that balance in favour of a regular reporting regime.
Okay, Jim, can I ask you to move Amendment 14A and speak to the other amendments in the group?
Thank you. I move amendments 14A, B, C, D and D in my name. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's amendment and the positive comments that she's made this morning on the need for an appropriate and regular reporting mechanisms and the offer of discussions to take forward suggestions on how best to implement that within the legislation. I've tabled these amendments to see whether we might not be able to add a few extra teeth to procedures for monitoring progress. Requiring an annual progress report, Amendment 14A, would assist our committee in undertaking its annual scrutiny of the Act, as we recommended in our own report at recommendation 68. 14B, C and D place a more rigorous requirement of reporting every 3 years instead of from time to time. And finally, 14E seeks to build on our committee recommendation that thought is given to how we can integrate reporting under this Act and reporting on the River Basin Management Plans and the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009. Amendment 74 is a consequential amendment. But in view of the very positive contribution from the Cabinet Secretary, I'm happy not to press the amendments today.
Cabinet Secretary, do you wish to wind up?
I don't think I need to add anything, Convener.
Okay, so the...
It's already indicated. Does any member wish to object?
Does any member wish to object to Jim withdrawing Amendment 14A? No, okay. And also have to call Amendment 14B. Jim, is that moved or not moved?
Not moved.
Anyone object? Okay, question 14B. Sorry, C.
Not moved.
It's not moved. Anyone object? D.
Not moved.
Anyone object? E.
Not moved.
Anyone object? Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to press or withdraw Amendment 14?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
That is agreed. The question is then that Section 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
That is agreed. I now move to control of water abstraction. Call Amendment 58 in the name of Alec Johnson, grouped with Amendments 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73 and 75. Alex, can I ask you to move Amendment 58 and speak to the other amendments in the group, please?
Thank you very much, Convener. I begin by moving Amendment 58 in my name, which is grouped with a rather long list of very similar amendments, the net purpose of which would be to remove Part 2 of the bill completely. The reason for this is that during stage 1, the RSPB and other witnesses highlighted a lack of clarity around the purpose of part 2 of the bill, and indeed many witnesses, if not all witnesses who had an opinion, were concerned that there had been no formal consultation on these proposals, which were a late addition to the bill. The purpose of Part 2 is particularly unclear since it's already within the scope of ministers to authorise such abstractions under existing regulations. Section 20 of the Water Environment Controlled Activities Scotland Regulations 2011, better known as CAR, allows Scottish ministers to determine, and I quote, applications under these regulations of any class or description specified in the direction. In their Stage 1 evidence, both the UK Environmental Law Association and the Law Society of Scotland questioned the need for Part 2 given these existing powers under CAR. The Scotch Whisky Association brought to my attention the fact that Regulation 15 of the Controlled Activity Regulations already requires SEPA to consider any likely social economic impacts or benefits associated with the controlled activity, such as an abstraction. Fears that without this bill's abstraction limit that rivers would run dry are misplaced, since I believe that abstractions that damage the environment would contravene licence conditions and as a result would bring about a fine or at least a court appearance. Similar views have been shared by organisations such as the Association of Salmon Fisheries Boards. In conclusion, it's my view that stakeholders are unclear about the policy intention behind the new abstraction regime. They believe that the controlled activities regulations are preferable to the creation of an additional regulatory and cost burden on businesses. There is a deep-seated concern about the lack of consultation prior to the introduction of the bill, and the government did not include any abstraction proposals in either of its 2 previous consultations. Finally, there is a general lack of understanding for the rationale behind the abstraction threshold limit of 10 megalitres per day or the list of exemptions. For that reason, I believe that there has been inadequate consultation and that this part of the bill has perhaps been rushed to legislation. And consequently, I think the best action in the meantime would be to remove Part 2 from the bill completely. I therefore, as I said, move Amendment 58 in my name.
Secretary. Oh, sorry, Elaine. Beg your pardon.
Just briefly to say, for many of the same reasons as Alec Johnson has mentioned, I support his amendments. It is unusual to find RSPB, the Scottish Whisky Association, the Association of Salmon Fishery Boards, all on the same side on a particular issue. And I think the main issue here is the lack of consultation. It's not necessarily that people's interests are exactly the same, but it's actually the lack of consultation on this which has raised so many concerns amongst such a wide variety of different organisations. Last week, one of my amendments was criticised for a lack of consultation, but here we have a whole section of a bill introduced with a lack of consultation. So I tend to agree with Alex at the moment that this part of the bill should be removed.
My understanding is the Scotch Whisky Association weren't concerned enough to call for the removal of this section, but over to you, Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, Alec Johnson's amendment says he's just outlined seek to remove the whole of Part 2 of the bill. I would say at the outset that this bill is arguably the most challenging element of the legislation, and it's perhaps therefore understandable that some may not, as Alec Johnson said, have fully understood the purpose of it. I also have commented previously on the consultation point. The lack of inclusion of this in previous consultations is the reason why we have continued to speak very carefully and very closely to the interested organisations and continue to do so. Of course, and perhaps this is the difference between the amendment Elaine Murray refers to in the context of another bill last week and this one. This has gone through stage 1 of the process, and people have had the opportunity to comment in that regard. If I can turn though to what this part of the bill is trying to achieve, and I think it's trying to achieve a very important purpose. We know in Scotland that we're fortunate to have water resources that are both in abundance and of high quality. We live in a world of increasing water scarcity, so that it is prudent and appropriate that we take steps to protect the resource we've got. We need to provide that protection so that the value of those resources, both to Scotland and to the wider world, can continue to be developed over the longer term. Part 2 of the bill does so by requiring the approval of ministers for future very large-scale abstractions. The idea is that ministers should have the opportunity to ensure that these large water abstractions, which will draw heavily on our water resources, are in Scotland's sustained best interests. We believe that will be of growing importance over time as both pressures and opportunities for Scotland created by increasing international water scarcity will emerge. Proposals for individual abstractions need to take account of that developing context. So in future, when someone wants to undertake a large water abstraction, that is one which is over 10 megalitres per day, they will not only be required to seek authorisation under CAR from SEPA, but they will also be required to make an application to ministers setting out what they're proposing to do. Now, some have suggested, and Alec Johnson has repeated these points today, that the Controlled Activities Regulations are sufficient for this purpose, but I strongly disagree with that. The CAR regime does work well for the purpose for which it was designed, to assess the impact of and control abstraction on activities that are liable to adversely affect the water environment. However, CAR is, quite rightly, focused on environmental concerns. What of abstractions that don't have an adverse environmental impact but might have other implications, for example, implications for communities near the water body? Further, we might find a need to determine between competing alternative demands for water that might be developing as a result of the changing views of water scarcity. If an abstraction is not considered by SEPA to have an adverse impact on the water environment, it will generally be approved under CAR. And while SEPA can take account of wider social and economic factors when determining an application for an abstraction, they cannot set conditions in relation to those wider social and economic issues. When granting CAR authorisation, SEPA is confined to imposing conditions that it considers necessary to protect the water environment. So Part 2 of the bill, sitting alongside CAR, allows us to take that wider social and economic perspective coupled with the environmental perspective that CAR already enables SEPA to take. I understand the concerns that have been raised by some stakeholder groups who are worried that we're seeking to limit or curtail certain activities, and I want to be very clear that that is not the case. Ministers will look at each application on its own merits. Ministers want, and indeed were obliged by Part 1 of the bill, to develop the value of Scotland's water resources, provided large-scale abstractions are sustainable, provided they give a sustained benefit to Scotland. I would expect ministers to grant their approval. And in looking at whether to grant permission or not and at what conditions to be set, ministers will consider what is in Scotland's best interest in the longer term and what represents good sustainable use of our water resources. We've also stated that ministers will bring forward regulations which will set out the information that is to accompany an application, and my officials will continue to work with stakeholders as these regulations are drafted. We've got other amendments later on that will cover some of these issues, but for the purposes of this group, I would ask Alec Johnson not to press these amendments, but if he is minded to do so, then I would ask the committee to reject them.
Can I ask you whether to wind up and to decide whether you're going to press or withdraw your amendment?
Thank you very much, Convener. We'll wind up briefly. The nature of Part 2 of the bill came as an unexpected inclusion to many of the key stakeholders. And I believe that the lack of understanding which the Minister alludes to and which I concede definitely exists may be as a direct result of the lack of consultation and the speed at which this piece of this part of the legislation was brought in without the prior knowledge of many who are concerned directly about it. The general principles that are included in Part 2 of the bill do cover areas which I admit will require further fine-tuning over time. But I believe that the Controlled Activities Regulations, while not perfect, were capable of adjustment in the meantime if additional objectives were to be achieved, and that would give given further time for us to consider the overall issue of abstraction and perhaps legislate again at some time in the future, should that be required. I therefore think the key principle as to whether this should be in the bill or not requires to be discussed by the committee, which I have done by bringing this amendment forward, and it is my intention to press this to a vote.
Okay, thank you. The question then is that Amendment 58 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes. No.
That's not agreed. There will be a division. Can I ask all members who support the amendment to indicate now? All those against? Okay, there were 3 members in favour and 4 against, so the amendment is not agreed. Call Amendment 59 in the name of Alec Johnson, already debated with Amendment 58. Okay, so the question is then that Section 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. We move to control of water abstraction. I call Amendment 15 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move Amendment 15 and speak to the other amendments in the group?
Thanks, Convener. These amendments all relate to Part 2 of the bill, which I'm glad to say is still in the bill, which relates to control of water abstraction. Amendment 15 is a minor technical amendment which clarifies that abstractions connected with the maintenance of mines and quarries are exempt from the Part 2 regime, regardless of whether or not that mine or quarry is in operation, and I move Amendment 15. Amendment 16 is an amendment that has arisen as a result of some of the comments that have been made at previous stages of this bill. It seeks to clarify and emphasise that ministers, when making regulations about the method of calculation of the amount abstracted, can make provision for all or some of the water to be left out of account. The intention there is that ministers will take into consideration the use of the water and, in particular, if a significant proportion of it is returned to the water environment, for example, cooling water that's used in distillation processes. I think this will address the concerns of some stakeholders that large-scale but predominantly non-consumptive users of water might be unnecessarily subjected to the requirement for ministerial approval. Amendment 17 will require ministers to consult the specified organisations and any others that they think appropriate about any proposal to alter the details of the abstraction consent regime, such as reducing the volume threshold above which consent is required. That amendment is made in recognition that consultation is helpful, both in terms of transparency and for stakeholders to have the opportunity to comment on a proposal to alter the regime that could affect them. Amendment 18 inserts into the bill provisions related to corporate offending. It will mean that where an offence is committed by a company or other corporate entity in relation to the abstraction control regime, and that offence is attributable to a corporate official such as a director or manager, that, as well as the company itself, can be prosecuted. Abstractions subject to the Part 2 regime will predominantly, if not exclusively, be made by corporations, and therefore the possibility of personal prosecution will encourage compliance with the regime, and I know there are examples of such provisions in other legislation. Amendment 19 is proposed in response to comments from the Subordinate Legislation Committee. It provides that regulations prescribing additional circumstances in which ministerial approval of a qualifying abstraction may be suspended or revoked will be subject to the affirmative procedure. And lastly, Amendment 20 defines what is meant by premises, as that term is used in Part 2 of the bill, which concerns control of water abstractions. The term is used in relation to the advice ministers receive from Scottish Water about the effect of an abstraction on its core services to premises in Scotland, and in relation to Scottish Water's exemption from the new approval regime. In both cases, the concept of premises ought to be as wide as possible, as ministers want to receive advice from Scottish Water in relation to the effects of a proposed abstraction on all premises that Scottish Water serves, and want to fully exempt Scottish Water from the abstraction regime in relation to its core services. I undertook to revisit the references to premises throughout the bill to check that they were appropriate, and this amendment provides an appropriate definition of premises for Part 2 of the bill.
Wish to say anything? Okay, the question is that Amendment 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Call Amendment 60 in the name of Alec Johnson, already debated with Amendment 58. Alec, to move
Not
or
moved.
not? The question is that Amendment... The question is that Section 7 then be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Call Amendment 16 in the name of Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 15. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. Call Amendment 61 in the name of Alec Johnson, already debated. That's not moved. So the question is that that Section 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 17 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with Amendment 15. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. We move to control of abstraction applications. I call Amendment 4 in the name of Elaine Murray, grouped with Amendments 5, 6 and 7. Elaine, can you speak to Amendment 4 and the other amendments, please?
Thank you, Convener. Section 9 concerns a procedure that would have to be followed when applying to Scottish ministers for approval for a qualifying abstraction. Section 9.2 states that ministers may make provision about the procedure for applications. This is too ambiguous, and there needs to be a clear duty on ministers to set out the procedures so that applicants are clear about what is expected of them. Again, Section 9.3 states that the regulations may have to include a number of requirements relating to the process, but again, there should be a clear requirement for the regulations to set out those requirements. Section 13 places a requirement on Scottish Water and SEPA to give Scottish ministers advice on any adverse impacts that might arise from the abstraction in question. However, Scottish Water and SEPA would only have to provide advice if ministers seek it. As currently drafted, ministers do not have to seek advice on the potential adverse impacts of every abstraction that qualifies under Part 2. Amendment 7 requires ministers to seek advice when relevant. The advice at the moment is only sought from SEPA and Scottish Water. A wider list of relevant bodies should be listed in the bill so that they are obliged to give evidence if the minister requests it. Such bodies should include Scottish Natural Heritage for advice relating to impacts on designated sites and protected species, national park authorities and local authorities for advice on impacts related to proposed abstractions within their administrative boundaries. Amendment 7 also requires ministers to take account of such advice when determining an application.
Anyone else? Okay, Cabinet Secretary.
Amendment 5 would require ministers to make more detailed provision by regulations regarding the application procedure for an abstraction approval, and also require them to ensure that all of the elements listed at Section 9.3 were included in the order. While I do agree that ministers should and fully intend to make regulations about the abstraction application process, I don't believe that reducing the flexibility over its content is sensible. I am therefore minded to support Amendment 4, but not Amendment 5. Amendments 6 and 7 also seek to alter the position in the bill that ministers may seek advice about an application for abstraction consent from SEPA in relation to the environmental impact and Scottish Water in relation to its core functions. These amendments would require ministers to seek advice from a greater number of organisations, and I believe this would hamper the application process by adding in bureaucracy which is not helpful. Ministers will of course be free to consult Scottish National Heritage and others informally in relation to any particular application should they consider that to be appropriate. I therefore ask Elaine Murray not to move Amendments 5, 6 and 7 but indicate my support for Amendment 4.
Elaine, can I ask you to wind up and press withdrawing?
I think I'll just go to pressing and withdrawing actually. I obviously will press Amendment 4, move Amendment 4 if the Minister is minded to accept it.
Okay, the question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. Call Amendment 5 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 4.
Not moved.
It's not moved. The question is that call Amendment 62 in the name of Alec Johnson. The question is that Section 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Call Amendment 63 in the name of Alec Johnson, already debated.
Not moved.
Call Amendment 6. Oh, the question is that Section 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yeah. Call Amendment 64 in the name of Alex. Can I put the question then on Section 11? Is that agreed?
Yeah.
And I call Amendment 65 in the name of Alec Johnson. Question is then that Section 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
I call Amendment 6 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 4. Elaine, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Call Amendment 7 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 4. Elaine, move or not move?
Not moved.
So call Amendment 66 in the name of Alex, not moved. The question then is is then that section 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call amendment 67 in the name of Alex Johnson.
Not moved.
That's not moved. So the question then is that section 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. Call amendment 68 in the name of Alex Johnson.
Not moved.
It's not moved. So the question is then that section 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. Alex, and I call your amendment 69 in your name.
Not moved.
It's not moved. So the question then is that section 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call amendment 70 in the name of Alex
Not
Johnson.
moved.
That's not moved. So the question is that section 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call amendment 18 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 15. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes. Agreed.
That is agreed. Call amendment 19 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 15. Cabinet Secretary to move.
Moved.
That is moved. The question is that amendment 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. Call amendment 71 in the name of Alex Johnson, already. That's not moved. So the question is that section 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call amendment 72 in the name of Alex Johnson, already
Not moved.
debated. That's not moved. So the question then is that section 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Call amendment 20 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 15. Cabinet Secretary to move.
Moved.
That's moved. So the question is that amendment 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
That is agreed. Call amendment 73 in the name of Alex Johnson.
Not moved.
That's not moved. So the question is that section 20 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. The question then is that section 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. Now move to Scottish Water's functions, and I call amendment 55 in the name of Jim Eadie, grouped with amendments 56 and 8. Jim, can I ask you to move amendment 55 and speak to the other amendments in the group?
Thank you, Convener. I move and speak to amendments 55 and 56 in my name. I don't wish to add much more to what I've said earlier in relation to the first group of amendments. Amendments 55 and 56 are suggested in light of the committee's Stage 1 report and the recommendation at recommendation 40, which calls for there to be a deserved equality of emphasis on all three pillars of sustainability. This is really about ensuring that we develop our water resources with due consideration being given not just to economic benefit but also to the environmental and social aspects as well. And so I look forward to hearing the Government's view on the proposed amendments.
Okay, Elaine, thank you, Jim. Can I ask Elaine to speak to Amendment 8 in the group and the other amendments in the group?
Right, thank you, Convener. Part 4 of this bill makes provisions to enable Scottish Water to enter into management agreements with land managers to protect and improve raw water quality. The inclusion of sustainable catchment management in the definition of sustainable development will help take forward a sustainable catchment management approach that addresses water quality problems at source, rather than relying solely on expensive end-of-pipe treatments solutions to treat water. This approach can deliver a range of benefits, including reduced water treatment costs and associated energy use, improved water quality, biodiversity, climate change adaptation and recreation. In its Stage 1 report, the committee made 2 recommendations in relation to catchment management at 149. The committee welcomed the emphasis on partnership working and its reference to catchment management initiatives, together with the non-legislative work that the Scottish Government intends to undertake to accompany the bill. The committee would also welcome further details of what the non-legislative work will include, and also how the Scottish Government intends to engage with those groups that have concerns about this parts of the bill to explain the rationale behind the provisions and their practical effect. In 150, the committee called on the Scottish Government to consider whether NGOs and catchment management groups should be specifically included in the bill, and to what extent it will include them in non-legislative activity that will be conducted in parallel with the bill. Amendment 8 also requires ministers to provide guidance that will set out how Scottish Water can best take forward the sustainable catchment management approach. And this could address the points raised by the committee in its recommendations 149 and 150 by clarifying how partnerships might be developed and how the relevant bodies and organisations could work together to take forward that approach.
Cabinet Secretary then.
Amendment 55 aims to define value in the context of Scottish Water's duty to develop the value of its assets and expertise as expressly including environmental and social benefit as well as economic benefits. This duty is in the new section 50A of the 2002 Act. The amendment would place particular emphasis upon these further aspects of value, and while that is appropriate, I think, in the context of the duty on Scottish ministers at Part 1 of the bill to develop the value of water resources, I'm not so sure that it's suitable in the context of Scottish Water's assets and expertise. I think these contexts are quite different. While Scottish Water's core functions are protected to some extent by Section 58, there could be adverse consequences from this amendment. As drafted, it could distort the way in which Scottish Water should properly use and develop its assets and expertise, with the resulting risk that they could end up with commercial disadvantages if forced to use and develop assets and expertise in the particular direction. In particular, it would affect the commercial operations of Scottish Water and those of its subsidiaries, which, given that they do act in a competitive market, are understandably and properly driven by, to a large extent, economic benefit. That said, the amendment has prompted us to think about this section again. Even as it stands, the reference to other benefit might need to be further qualified. So in reflection, which has been prompted by this amendment, we do intend to look again at this matter before stage 3 in any event. So I would thank Jimmy D for bringing the amendment forward, ask him to withdraw it for the reasons I've given, but on the understanding that it will be revisited before stage 3 and on an undertaking that I'm happy to discuss our developing thinking on the matter further with him. Amendment 56 adds a reference to achieving sustainable development to Scottish Water's duty to develop its assets and expertise. Scottish Water's functions are covered by Section 51 of the Water Industry Scotland Act 2002, which already requires Scottish Water to exercising its functions to act in the way best calculated to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. I would therefore submit that this amendment is not necessary and ask Jimmy D that he doesn't move it. On Amendment 8, Scottish Water has begun to pilot aspects of sustainable catchment management and is working in partnership with other agencies and those living and working in particular catchments to explore the potential of a range of interventions. Scottish Water is, of course, concerned with developing all sustainable techniques to support water treatment processes in compliance with drinking water quality standards. This bill seeks to provide Scottish Water with the powers it needs to support the sustainable management of our water resources, and I think it would be disproportionate to highlight one aspect of that wider sustainable approach. Sustainable catchment management will develop in importance over time and it will gain definition, and I do expect Scottish Water to play their part in that, but I don't consider placing additional reporting burdens on just one of the many partners involved in that process to be particularly helpful. I would therefore, in understanding Elaine Murray's motivations in moving this amendment, ask her to consider that and to not move Amendment 8.
Okay, can I ask Jim Eadie to wind up and press or withdraw his amendment?
Thank you, Convener. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her explanation and clarification, and in particular understand the distinction that she has highlighted between the duty that is placed on ministers and the requirement that may be placed on Scottish Water. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to revisit the issues raised in Amendment 55 at stage 3, and so I'm content not to press these amendments to the vote.
Okay, the member wishes to withdraw his amendment. Is that agreed? Okay. I call Amendment 56 in the name of Jim Eadie, already debated with Amendment 55. Jim, to move or not move?
Not moved.
It's not moved. The question is that the question is that Section 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. Call Amendment 8 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 55. Elaine, to move or not move?
Not moved.
The question then is that Sections 23 to 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
That is agreed. Move to errors in metering. I call Amendment 21 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and a group of its own. Cabinet Secretary to move and speak to the amendment.
Thanks, Convener. Amendment 21 inserts a new section into the bill. It's an amendment that has been suggested by Scottish Water. They have brought to my attention an apparent inconsistency between Section 54 of the Water Scotland Act 1980 and the UK Weights and Measures legislation in relation to the permissible tolerances for water meter accuracy. I've therefore agreed to bring forward this technical amendment, as I think it's sensible to have consistency in these matters. For completeness, I should mention that what constitutes high and low flow rates is highly technical and unsuitable for primary legislation. So those terms will be defined in subordinate legislation, and the amendment that I'm moving here expressly requires that to be the case. So I move Amendment 21.
Anyone else wish to speak on this amendment? Okay. Anything further, Cabinet Secretary?
No.
The question is then that Amendment 21 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yeah. That is agreed. Move to raw water quality. I call Amendment 22 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 23, 24 and 25. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 22 and speak to all amendments in the group.
These amendments make changes to Part 4 of the bill, which is about raw water quality. The intention is to allow Scottish Water to take a proactive approach to investigating the raw water within a catchment and determining any factors that might be impacting on its quality. Scottish Water has to treat raw water so that it meets drinking water quality standards when it becomes part of the public water supply. In some instances, it might be cheaper to address the causes of upstream pollution through subsequent treatment. Part 4 of the bill is about empowering Scottish Water to be able to gather the information it needs to make that assessment. Amendment 22 provides that raw water that forms part of a private water supply is excluded from these provisions. It wouldn't be appropriate or necessary for Scottish Water to be able to take steps to investigate raw water that was part of a private supply. Their interest is only in water that is intended to become part of the public supply. What constitutes a private supply is to be defined in subordinate legislation, as this is likely to be done by reference to how a private supply is defined in other subordinate legislation to which it wouldn't be appropriate for primary legislation to refer. And I move Amendment 22. Amendments 23 and 24 provide clarification that in undertaking investigations into raw water quality, an approved person may use equipment that measures the water, as well as taking samples or installing equipment to do so. Measurement of water will often be a necessary element of assessing raw water quality. Amendment 25 confirms that regulations defining private water supplies for the purposes of this part are subject to the negative regulation procedure. I believe that's the appropriate level of scrutiny for such orders. The amendment brings the procedure for the two types of order that relate to the raw water provisions into a single new section in the Water Scotland Act 1980, into which the provisions on raw water quality are being inserted.
Any comments? Okay, the question then is that Amendment 22 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. I call Amendments 23, 24 and 25, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated. Cabinet Secretary, I invite you to move these amendments 23 to 24 en bloc.
Moved.
Does anyone object to a single question being put on these amendments? Okay, so the question is that amendments 23 to 25 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. The question is then that section 27 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. We move to agreements for water quality. I call Amendment 10 in the name of Elaine Murray in a group of its own. Elaine, to move and speak to your amendment.
Thank you, Convener. The current provisions in the bill enable Scottish Water to enter into agreements for the purpose of protecting or improving raw water quality. Obviously, that's a good thing, and the management agreements will help to contribute to sustainable catchment management, whereby drinking water quality issues are addressed at source. However, the current provisions fail to provide the opportunity to undertake management in drinking water catchments to deliver wider benefits and to meet other statutory duties, for example, those in respect of the Water Framework Directive and sustainable flood management in an integrated way. Amendment 10 is intended to ensure that the meeting of environmental objectives under the WOOS Act and the Sustainable Flood Management Objectives under the Flood Risk Management Act are included when entering into such an agreement.
Anyone else? Cabinet Secretary.
Section 28 of the bill inserts a new Section 68A into the Water Scotland Act 1980 that enables Scottish Water to enter into agreements with landowners or local authorities to carry out activities that Scottish Water considers necessary to protect or improve raw water quality. Amendment 10 would enable Scottish Water to enter into agreements with landowners or local authorities in order to also carry out activities that Scottish Water considers necessary in order to meet objectives under the Water Environment and Water Services Scotland Act 2003, the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009, and for the purposes of the duty in this this bill to develop the value of Scotland's water resources. In relation to the 2003 Act objectives referred to in paragraph A of the amendment, these are set by SEPA in accordance with the Water Framework Directive. Scottish Water is not obliged to meet those objectives. I don't think, therefore, that there is anything to be gained by empowering Scottish Water to enter into voluntary agreements with landowners to try to achieve those objectives. As for flood risk management, this section of the bill is about agreements to improve raw water quality, not about flood risk management. I consider that the extensive duties in the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 are already sufficient, and this amendment, as regards paragraph B, I would argue is unnecessary. Finally, as regards paragraph 3 of the amendment, Scottish Water is already empowered by section 21 of the bill to do anything that Scottish Water considers will assist in the development of the value of Scotland's water resources. That power is very broad, and as such, although not explicit, it encompasses the ability to enter into agreements with landowners, occupiers or local authorities. As such, I would also argue that paragraph C of the amendment is unnecessary. In summary, I don't consider any of the three elements of this amendment to be necessary. Furthermore, I don't consider that they belong in the new section 68A of the 1980 Act, which concerns agreement for raw water quality. The Water Framework Directive and flood risk management issues have nothing to do with raw water quality. In addition, we believe this amendment wouldn't add anything to the duty already placed on Scottish Water under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 to work with other responsible authorities with a view to reducing overall flood risk. All of that said, I would welcome further discussion with Elaine Murray ahead of stage 3 about this to see whether there are any issues that are worthy of further exploration. But for now, and for the reasons I've stated, I would ask the member to withdraw the amendments.
Elaine, can I ask you to wind up and press or withdraw your amendment?
Thanks, Convener. Of course, the primary issue in the bill, it constitutes a part of Scottish Water's core functions in terms of raw water quality. The amendment was not intended to take away from that core responsibility, but to try to ensure that Scottish Water considered that there are opportunities to deliver other statutory duties, such as under the WUS Act or the Flood Risk Management Act, alongside the delivery of the core function of improving raw water quality. I'm prepared to withdraw the amendment on the basis that maybe this isn't the most appropriate way of achieving that particular objective, and that we can maybe look at further further refining of some of that purpose before stage 3.
Does anyone object to Elaine withdrawing this amendment at this stage? Okay, that amendment is withdrawn, and the question is that section 28 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that sections 29 to 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. We move to discharge of fat, oil and grease from trade premises, and I call amendments 26 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with amendments 27, 28 and 29. Cabinet Secretary to move amendment 26 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
These amendments relate to Part 6 of the bill, which deals with the sewerage network and any discharges into the public sewer. Under the provisions that this part is inserting into the Sewerage Scotland Act 1968, an offence is committed if a person passes or permits to be passed fat, oil or grease into the public sewer network from trade premises. Substances like fat cost Scottish Water a great deal of difficulties. They can block pipes, reduce flow rates and are time-consuming and costly to remove. However, there are situations where a person may be permitted under Part 2 of the 1968 Act to pass fat, oil or grease into the network. It goes without saying that a person shouldn't be committing an offence by doing this when permitted to do it. While the competing rules would fall to be reconciled in practice, Amendment 26 makes it explicitly clear that no offence is committed when the act in question is done with the relevant permission. That's consistent with another similar offence already in the 1968 Act. Amendment 27 is a technical change consequential to Amendment 26. Amendment 28 similarly provides that where Scottish Water has given its consent to the discharge, it can't recover its costs for repairing any damage caused by it. Amendment 29 is a technical change consequential to Amendment 28. I therefore move Amendment 26.
To speak? No. Okay, so the question is that Amendment 26 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. Call amendments 27, 28 and 29, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated. Invite the Cabinet Secretary to move amendments 27 to 29 on block.
Moved.
Has anyone got any objection to a single question being put? No. Okay, the question is that amendments 27 to 29 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Those are agreed. The question then is that section 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. The question is that section 33 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. We now move to definition of trade premises. Call Amendment 9 in the name of Elaine Murray in a group on its own. Elaine to move and speak to amendment.
Thank you, Convener. It may be that Amendment 9 has already been, or the purpose of Amendment 9 has already been incorporated in Amendment 20, but I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will be able to advise if that is the case. Amendment 9 clarifies the definition of trade premises by inserting premises used or managed by a public body or office holder within the meaning of Section 58(8) of the Nature Conservation Act. The bill creates an offence in relation to the passing of fats, oils and grease from trade premises into a public sewer or drain and uses the Sewerage Scotland Act 1968, Section 59(1) definition of a trade premises, which is any premises used or intended to be used for carrying on any trade or industry, and shall include premises used or intended to be used in whole or in part for carrying out agriculture, horticulture or scientific research, or the experiment, or as a hospital, or as an accommodation provided by a care home service. Now, many public sector premises, such as local authority offices, schools and further education establishments, are not currently covered by the 1968 Act definition. And given the scale of catering facilities within some public sector premises, it would be sensible for them to be covered by the provisions relating to the discharge of fats, oils and grease into the sewerage network. But as I say, this may have been overtaken by Amendment 20.
Okay, no other members wish to speak, so Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Elaine Murray for outlining the reasons behind this amendment. It is a different issue to the one we've previously debated, so I think it's fair to debate it on its own merits. The amendment would bring premises used by certain public bodies or office holders within the new offence relating to the discharge of fat, oil and grease from trade premises, and the new power for Scottish Water to recover expenses for any damage caused to sewers or drains as a result. With the exception of hospitals and care homes, premises used by public bodies are generally excluded from these new provisions and from the trade effluent consent regime in Part 2 of the 1968 Act. The amendment also raises a question about whether the trade effluent consent regime would also be extended to cover premises used by these bodies, as at first sight they're brought into it as a result of the change to the meaning of trade premises, but on the other definition of trade effluent is not expanded to include waste from these premises. The 1968 Act regime works well and will be further improved by the addition through this bill of the provisions expressly prohibiting the discharge of fats, oil and grease into the public sewer. These provisions complement provisions already in the 1968 Act, and I'm not aware of any concerns on the part of Scottish Water because they don't extend to premises used by public bodies generally. I would urge Elaine Murray to withdraw Amendment 9, but I would be happy to have a discussion before stage 3, just in case there is any particular reason behind this amendment that we are not encapsulating in the response I've just given her to it.
Yeah, so Elaine to
withdraw the amendment at the moment.
Okay, the member wishes to withdraw. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, we move to private sewerage works. I call Amendment 30 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendment 11. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 30 and speak to both amendments in the group.
This amendment relates to the provisions in Part 6 of the bill about the maintenance of private sewage treatment works. These most commonly take the form of a septic tank. Where such works are owned in common, the consent of all proprietors to any maintenance is normally required, either by title conditions or at common law. That can result in a minority blocking the attempts of their fellow owners to empty or maintain the tank properly, potentially damaging the water environment and placing all proprietors in breach of conditions imposed under CAR. This part of the bill seeks to address that problem by allowing any owner of such works that are owned in common to undertake necessary maintenance without the consent of all the other owners and to recover their share of the cost from these owners. Although it's implicit that these provisions are intended to override any contrary rules of the common law and any alternative provision in the title deeds of the properties concerned, it is, I think, prudent to put that matter beyond doubt. So this amendment accordingly clarifies that these provisions take precedence over any contrary rule of law or real burden. And I therefore move Amendment 30. Amendment 11 would require SEPA to publish a strategy to secure better public understanding of the statutory requirements about the registration, care and maintenance of septic tanks. This amendment aims to address concerns that have been raised around the lack of awareness of how best to maintain a septic tank, and I agree that this is an issue. I understand that SEPA, Scottish Water and my officials have agreed a work plan in this regard, and it's been published on the Scottish Government's website. That work plan aims to address various issues around septic tanks, from increasing the number of tanks that have been registered with SEPA, sharing data on their location and increasing public awareness of responsibilities in relation to their maintenance and emptying. I'm sure that SEPA and Scottish Water would be happy to provide an update on the programme of work to the committee or to any individual members to reassure them that the work is underway in this area. And in light of that, I would ask Elaine Murray not to move the amendment.
Elaine, can I ask you to speak to Amendment 11, please, and the other amendments in the group?
Convener, Amendment 11 makes provision in the bill regarding septic tank maintenance, in particular in relation to the need for a clear strategy about how to improve public awareness of the registration, care and maintenance of septic tanks. Despite a requirement under the Water Environment Controlled Activities Scotland Regulations 2011 for all septic tanks to be registered with SEPA, it is known that the register of septic tanks in Scotland is incomplete. A policy statement on rural wastewater treatment recognised about 40% of septic tanks remain unregistered, and that document made recommendations regarding better management of septic tanks, one of which was that SEPA should raise awareness of the legal obligations of septic tank owners, and may indeed be that the work plan to which the Cabinet Secretary referred is actually part of that awareness-raising process. Amendment 11 takes that forward by requiring SEPA to produce a strategy that clearly sets out how it will improve awareness on the registration, care and maintenance of septic tanks in Scotland. The bill already includes provisions to improve septic tank management, and the amendment aimed to build on this by including a requirement for such a strategy. However, I understand from the Cabinet Secretary's previous remarks that a work plan is obviously already underway, and therefore I'm not going to move the amendment at this point.
Okay, so Elaine wishes to withdraw amendment. Oh, right,
Well,
so
yeah,
it's not
move
moved.
it.
Sorry, of course. Okay, Alex, you wanted to say
Yes.
something, even though...
I was just going to say a few words, effectively in support of Amendment 11, although Elaine has made it clear that she doesn't intend moving it. I have to say that my experience on the ground is that there is a great deal of confusion and misunderstanding surrounding the issue of registration and maintenance of septic tanks. It's something that appears sporadically, but quite often in my mailbag, perhaps largely due to the fact that I'm in a rural area where there are a lot of private septic tanks and sewage works. But it is something I believe that may well be covered by existing regulation, but the implementation of which is not as perfect as it might otherwise be. So I think it's definitely an area which Elaine has quite correctly identified as something that needs work, and something which I would be very supportive of any improvement in the position in future.
Secretary, do you wish to wind up?
I would agree with Alec Johnson's comments. I think it's helpful to have this brought forward. It's that lack of awareness and understanding that has prompted the work that I've referred to. So in asking for this amendment not to be moved, it's not that I don't recognise the issue that's been raised. I just think it's been dealt with through the work that I've already described. And as I say, the Scottish Water and SEPA, I'm sure, would be happy to brief the committee further on that.
So the question is that Amendment 30 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. And to be strictly correct, I call Amendment 11 in the name of Elaine Murray, already debated with Amendment 30. Elaine, to move or not moved? Moved. That's not moved. So the question is that Section 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Sections 35 and 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. Move to water shortage orders, and I call Amendment 31 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51 and 52. Cabinet Secretary, can I ask you to move Amendment 31 and speak to all the amendments in the group?
Thanks, Convener. These amendments refine the operation of water shortage orders, the detail of which is mainly set out in Schedule 1 to the bill. They've been developed following discussions with Scottish Water and SEPA regarding the anticipated practical operation of these provisions. While in Scotland we don't expect to have to make water shortage orders very frequently, when we do, we want the provisions to be clear and unambiguous, providing a clear set of actions and a timescale for the process, including straightforward process by which people can make representations to ministers and are able to achieve the right result. Amendment 31 makes it clear that a water shortage order may impose water-saving measures in relation to particular premises or property, or types of premises or property. For example, they might apply only to premises used for particular purposes or only to particular types of buildings. Amendment 32 provides that Scottish Water may publicise proposed water shortage orders by such additional means in addition to its website and a newspaper as it thinks fit. Amendments 33 and 34 make minor drafting clarifications. Amendment 35 provides that Scottish Water need only notify affected owners in relation to a proposed order insofar as it's reasonably practicable to do so. That will avoid issues that might otherwise arise if Scottish Water can identify a particular owner despite its best efforts to do so. Amendments 36 to 44 are technical amendments that clarify but don't significantly change certain details regarding the notice and representation provisions of Schedule 1. Amendments 45 and 46 will reduce from 2 to 1 the minimum number of newspapers in which Scottish Water must publish notice of a water shortage order or an extension of such an order. These are minimum requirements and Scottish Water may publish more widely if it thinks it appropriate. In practice, we can expect, I think, the national media to play their part in publicising the fact that a water shortage order has been made. Amendments 47 and 48 are drafting clarification. Amendment 49 ensures that measuring equipment can be installed on premises as part of a water shortage order where Scottish Water needs to take measurements. Amendment 50 will ensure that wherever Scottish Water or ministers are obliged to publish or give notice of something in connection with water shortage orders, they do so without undue delay. And that reflects what's likely to be the relatively urgent context of a water shortage order and ensures that each stage of the process is progressed promptly. Amendment 51 adds a corporate offending provision in relation to the Section 41 offence of failure to comply with an order in a similar manner to the corporate offending provision amendment discussed earlier in relation to the Part 2 abstraction control regime. That will allow corporate officials to be prosecuted where corporate behaviour is properly attributable to them, and the intention there is to encourage compliance. And finally, Amendment 52 broadens the definition of premises as it applies in Part 7 of the Bill so that a water shortage order may apply to as broad a range of premises as possible. In the case of a shortage in the public supply, everyone, from businesses to householders, could be asked to do their bit to help reduce demand in the network, and this amendment seeks to clarify that every conceivable type of premises may be the subject of a water shortage order. In summary, Convener, these amendments, although they are mainly technical in nature, are all important to ensure the proper and effective functioning of the new system of water shortage orders that is being introduced by the Bill. I move Amendment 31.
The question then is Amendment 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Section 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Sections 38 and 39 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. Call amendments 32 to 48 and 49 and 50, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated. Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move amendments 32 to 50 en bloc?
Moved.
Does anyone object to a single question being put? Okay. The question then is that amendments 32 to 50 are agreed. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. The question is that Schedule 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Sections 40 and 41 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Call Amendment 51 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 31. Cabinet Secretary to move.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 51 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. The question is that Sections 42 to 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. The question is that Schedule 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Sections 45 and 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 52 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 31. Cabinet Secretary to move.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The question is that Section 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. The question is that Section 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. I call Amendment 74 in the name of Jim Addy, already debated with Amendment 14. Jim, to move or not move?
Not moved.
The question is that that's not moved. So the question is that Schedule 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes, agreed. That is agreed. The question is that Sections 49 to 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. That is agreed. I call Amendment 57 in the name of Jim Eady, already debated with Amendment 53. Jim, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That's not moved. I call Amendment 75 in the name of Alec Johnson, already debated with Amendment 58. Alec, to move or not move?
Unfortunately, due to my failure to persuade the Minister earlier, there's no need for this one either. Not moved.
That's not moved. So the question is that the long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed, and that ends stage 2 consideration of the bill. Can I thank the Cabinet, Cabinet Secretary and officials, and I'll have a short suspension to allow the Cabinet Secretary and officials to leave the room. Okay, we'll now reconvene. And the third item is the proposed responsible parking bill. We're now going to hear from Sandra White on her statement of reasons lodged to accompany her draft proposal for the responsible parking bill. Standing orders requires any member wishing to introduce a member's bill to first lodge a draft proposal, a brief explanation of the purposes of the proposed bill, and either a consultation document or a written statement of reasons why consultation on the draft proposal is unnecessary. This session is required as the member has chosen not to carry out a public consultation on our proposals, and the Parliamentary Bureau has referred the draft proposal to this committee. Can I welcome Sandra White to the meeting and ask her to make a brief opening statement?
Thank you very much, Convener. You'll be glad to know that this is not all my paperwork, it's from the previous committee. Can I just thank you, Convener, and all the other members of the committee for taking time out of, I know, is a very busy schedule to allow me to put forward my reasons of why, under Rule 9.14.3 of Parliament Standing Orders, that I believe further consultation is unnecessary. I can't explain why, but I know you have a copy of the reasons, and I would, open it to the committee if they wish me to go through the copy there, or whether you wish to just ask me questions. I'm quite happy to take it forward in that way, Convener.
Yeah, if you could explain a little of why you don't think that any further consultation is necessary, Sandra, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. Before I do start on the statement of reasons, I would like to thank the previous MSP, Joe Fitzpatrick, and also Ross Finney for their work in previously putting forward the responsible parking bill and parking raise pavements, basically. On October 2010, Ross Finney put forward the same bill, proposed regulation of drop kerbs and pavement parking, and the consultation was undertaken then, and the results were published on the 8th of March 2011. 123 responses were received, and 83% of the respondents was positive they wished the bill to be put forward. 28th of March 2012, Joe Fitzpatrick, MSP, lodged a proposal for the responsible parking bill also, and he took forward the work that was done by Ross Finney, because obviously the bill had to be dropped when Ross Finney was no longer re-elected. I was asked to take over the bill as Joe Fitzpatrick was promoted to become a minister, and I was very glad and privileged to be able to take forward that bill. The consultation received 414 responses, and 95% of that consultation was in fact positive to put forward a responsible parking bill. I also have to thank, and I won't go through all of them, some are in the Parliament here behind me, regarding Responsible Parking Alliance and various other groups, Guide Dogs for the Blind, Epilepsy Scotland, etc. They were all involved in helping me to put forward the consultation. I also was at that time doing a consultation of my own in my area of Glasgow Kelvin, and these people also responded to that consultation. Apart from the people who are named here and the groups who are named here in the paper, we also contacted the police, the fire brigade, individuals and community councils, and received their consultations also. As you can see from the paper, there are links to the parliamentary website in regards to the consultation responses and what was put out by the consultation. And I would ask that you look upon this request of no further consultation favourably, and hopefully we can put forward a bill which will give justice to the many people out there in Scotland who at this moment in time don't have justice, fairness or equality. And I think most people have know about the pavement parking, the double parking, guide dogs, young mothers with prams, elderly people, wheelchairs. Pavements are for people and roads are for cars. So I would leave it at that. Convener, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone's got.
Okay, that's fine. Adam.
Morning, Sandra. Could I ask you how your proposal compares with the proposal lodged by Joe Fitzpatrick? Is it exactly the same proposal?
It's exactly the same proposal, Adam. Basically, there were suggestions that we could put this bill forward much quicker if we looked at the deregulation and decriminalisation of parking, which I know Joe looked at also. But that would be by individual local authority, And in the fairness and justice and equality, it's much better to put it forward for all of the local authorities and not take them individually. So in that manner, it perhaps goes slightly further, but it's exactly the same as Joe Fitzpatrick's bill.
Elaine?
You mentioned there were, what, 414 responses to Joe Fitzpatrick's bill, which were generally, the vast majority of which were favourable. I wonder, from that consultation, if there were particular key issues that came out, and if so, how you took them, you've been able to take those into consideration.
414 responses has been the largest response to any private member's bill, and 95% of them were in favour of the bill. The responses we've received, not just through the consultation, but obviously as you know, an MSP, people coming to my constituency office with issues. I've taken some of these forward. Elected local council, in my case Glasgow City Council. I have visited the areas where people had the specific problems. If I could give you an example of, in my area where there's an elderly people's home, cars are parked four wheels on the pavement, revving up under the windows of the residents. They cannot get out of that elderly people's home with a wheelchair, walking stick. In fact, they can't get out at all, and ambulances and other emergency services can't get in. Now, I'm not saying that people are... I think it's perhaps part of this bill as well is about education, and I think it's about educating drivers that it's just not the done thing to be parking in this way. So as individual cases come up, I have looked at them, but obviously we've given them a response within the responses they've sent to us.
In particular, weren't any particular concerns that came up through Joe Fitzpatrick's consultation, or extensions that came up, or potential extensions that came up through Joe Fitzpatrick's consultation? There was nothing that actually caused you to feel that you need to make changes to the bill at all?
No, I think if there's any, I would say negative responses then rather than the positive responses regarding the bill, I think they can be looked at as stage one of the bill as it goes through the process, and I'm sure we'll come to some arrangement. In the case that you're speaking about, there were some areas where they said that some of the streets may be too narrow to enable them to be parked on both sides, and I think that's something we would have to look at as it comes up under stage one, and I'm sure that sense and common sense would prevail in regards to that. I think that, as I say, I don't think they do it deliberately to be obstructive. I think it's education, and anyone would see that pavements should be used by people in wheelchairs. We had a case where a man who was blind came out, walked along the road. His stick hit a car which was parked on the pavement. It broke that stick in half, and that man was stranded on a pavement for well over 2 hours because he couldn't get off the pavement because he couldn't use his stick. Now, I'm sure the person who parked that car didn't intend that to happen, but not just irresponsible, very, very dangerous as well. So all of this will come out, and I'm glad that it will come out as we go along to stage one, stage two of the bill.
Alex?
We heard that there's been a sense of previous consultation on this. I just wanted to know what contact you have had since you took on responsibility for it with stakeholders, and whether you have a continuing dialogue with stakeholders and who these significant stakeholders might be.
Yes, I certainly have. I mean, I have worked very closely with Joe Fitzpatrick. As I said, I was actually looking at a bill similar, but within my own area, in the York area of my constituency. So I'd spoken to Joe before about that, and also consultation with people who are in the audience today as well, Guide Dogs for the Blind, Responsible Parking Alliance, who are here today, Capability Scotland. So I've had lots of meetings with them also, but also with community councils in the areas and individuals also who contacted me. So I still keep up, that contact obviously, and we are still getting emails, Twitter and letters in as well from people who are very supportive of that bill, who've heard since it's been launched, and obviously continue to do that. The consultations were gathered in, and I worked along with Joe Fitzpatrick and his assistant to produce the consultations which appear on my website now. So I've continued to work with them and will continue to do so as well.
So post-consultation, the dialogue with stakeholders continues actively?
It does, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Gordon?
I was wanting to ask you about the implementation of the proposed bill. Given that much of the legislation relating to parking is reserved to Westminster, what discussions, have any of you had with the Scottish Government and others, and how it would operate or be enforced?
I have had meetings with, I call it NEBU, but I can't remember what the new terminology is. At NEGBU, there's a new terminology. It's the obviously members' bill team. I have had consultation and spoke to them as well. I've also spoken to the Minister regarding this, who is very supportive of it. In fact, was at the launch of it. We believe that the legislation is there under the Scotland Act to put this bill through. NEBU, I've had some, what would you say? I think discussions is probably the word. Discussions as to iron out difficulties that NEBU had highlighted to us, but I'm still insistent that the Scotland Act covers the bill for parking here. At the moment, as I said in my introductions at the beginning, you have the situation where you can decriminalise parking, and they can use that just now. In individual councils. So the legislation is there at the moment, and I believe under the Scotland Act, the legislation is also there to put this Scotland-wide as well.
Okay, anyone else got any questions? No. Okay, thank you very much, Sandra, and we'll consider what we've heard from you today later on in the meeting and reach a view as to whether we're content with your statement of reasons. Move now to agenda item 4, European Commission Work Programme. This is consideration of the European Commission Work Programme and EU priorities for engagement and scrutiny. And invite Jim Eadie to speak to this paper.
Thank you, Convener. This agenda item is for the committee to review the European Commission Work Programme and agree priorities in the coming year. The Parliament strategy for EU engagement requires us to undertake this annual review so that a chamber debate is held on all subject committees' EU priorities. Following today's consideration, the committee will write to the European and External Relations Committee outlining our priorities, and they will compile our response together with all other subject committee responses in advance of the chamber debate due to take place at the end of February. Members will see from the paper that has been circulated that it includes a number of priorities which are still ongoing from last year. Members will also see under each priority some suggested committee activity. Following consideration today, if members are agreed, we can arrange for requests for information to be issued accordingly. In addition, the paper includes an update on the Brussels visit which took place in December 2012 involving the European rapporteurs from across the Parliament's committees. The paper highlights proposals within 4 policy areas which continue to be priorities for this committee. These are the fields of public procurement, water resources, broadband infrastructure and state aid. The proposals on a blue belt for a single market for maritime transport and a framework on the future EU ports policy were flagged up by the committee as potentially being of interest. The proposals from the European Commission suggest both initiatives will focus on developing the single market in both these sectors. But as these issues are largely reserved, the committee will wish to retain a watching brief, but not to include them as its priorities. The committee is asked to consider and agree its priorities for EU scrutiny on proposals contained within the European Commission Work Programme and to note the update provided on the Brussels visit.
Okay, anyone have any comments?
No.
Okay, do we agree the EU priorities as set out in the paper? Yes. Okay, and are we agreed that we now write to the European and External Relations Committee detailing this committee's priorities and proposed actions, which will be debated alongside the subject committee's EU priorities in the chamber in the coming months? And in addition, we'll make this information available on the committee's website, web pages. Yeah. Okay, is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, as agreed in agenda item 1, we'll now move into private session.